Hi everyone, welcome to this week's video. It's going to be a short one this week. We're going to go over some examples as well as definitions of connotation and denotation. And then we're going to talk about how that works in literature as well as a little bit in nonfiction, but we're going to be moving more into literary reading this week. So when we talk about connotation and denotation, it's something that you're familiar with or something that you use naturally anyway. You change which words you use, which diction you use, based on what audience that you have in mind. So for instance, we've talked in the past about how you talk to your parents differently than you talk to your friends, differently than you talk to a principal or a police officer. Okay. When we look at connotation and denotation in literary texts, it's really more about getting across the sort of image that you want the reader to have, an image of place or time, a description, something that's going to give that reader the exact idea that you as the writer have when you're describing a given thing or a situation. So when we look at connotation and denotation, when we talk about denotation, it's the literal dictionary definition of a word. It's if you look the word up right now in the dictionary, what would you find? It is this literal definition. Nothing more than that. Connotation is a bit more tricky though. Connotation is the associated or implied meanings that go with a word, and these can be both positive and negative. So a lot of times with connotation, these words or the associated meaning of words can sort of evolve over time. We can have different associations get added to words as culture moves forward. Some words become sort of out of style or out of fashion. Some words pick up new meanings that are positive or meanings that are negative, depending on sort of how a culture shapes those words. But you'll see sort of the difference as we look at these situations. And so on the left side, I've given you a situation, and on the right side, I've given you the same situation with different wording. And you'll see the differences here. So let's look at this first one under breakfast is served. The cook made breakfast for everyone. A plate of scrambled eggs and toast with sausage links was handed to each person at the diner counter. Whereas if I look over on this right side, notice the difference. Same exact situation, but I've used different words with different connotations. The chef prepared brunch for the guests. Plates of eggs Benedict and English muffins with baked ham were served to each patron of the cafe. Now, some of these are obviously different words. You know, scrambled eggs versus eggs Benedict it's just a different meal, for instance. But if we look at some of the words that aren't so different, we look at cook and we look at chef, right? These are different words in terms of connotation. They mean the same thing or can mean the same thing. A chef cooks, but for whatever reason, we associate cook as sort of lesser than chef. If I call myself a cook, you can see me perhaps in my kitchen making dinner for my family. But if I call myself a chef, you assume that I have some training, some official experience in that capacity, right? So you can see how even though I'm describing a very similar situation, the connotation of the words that I use, one has a more refined connotation, right? This, you get the picture of a diner in which perhaps common people sit and eat a pretty simple breakfast. And over here, you get the idea that this is a cafe. People perhaps are dressed nicer. There's a difference between brunch and breakfast. You can see those things. Let's take a look at business time here. The owner kept a respectable business. While thrifty, he was always generous to his employees in the form of salary and benefits. Okay, let's look at the second one and see if we see any differences. The owner ran a profitable company. While cheap, he always paid his workers the wages and entitlements he owed them. Okay, so another one to look at here. What's the difference between a wage and a salary? What's the difference between an entitlement and a benefit? Okay. What's the difference between being profitable and running a profitable company versus a respectable business? These are things that we come to associate differently, even though it's saying essentially the same thing. Our next example, under here, buy, consume, own. The shopper bought a TV. It had a large screen and a clear picture, and he got a good price for it. Versus, the customer purchased a 4K television. It had a crystal clear screen, and he got a fantastic deal. Both shoppers got a deal on this TV, but it seems like one got the better deal or got the better product. So you can see how if I wanted to describe exactly what I meant and give you a good picture of what I meant, I would choose maybe this one. Or if I wanted to sort of understate it, maybe for whatever reason, I would choose this one. It's not that this is necessarily better. This is certainly more specific, but there are also reasons for using simpler words depending on what the context is, right? I might want to write this as sort of an understatement. Maybe I'm jealous of the person who bought the TV and got a better deal, and I write it this way as a way of understating what I think is a good deal, but I'm not happy about it. So there are different reasons to use different words here, but you can see the differences even though they're the same general situation. Let's look at our last two examples here. Parenting. Mother and the father of the child brought it from the hospital to the house a while back and have since reared it into an adult human, or a human adult. Versus, the mom and dad of the baby brought her home from the hospital nursery many years ago, raising her into a young lady. Okay. The left side, okay, gets the point across. Sounds perhaps like these are robots raising a child. And the right side seems more nurturing. Again, you could picture reasons you might use either one. This one is almost comical in how cold and distant it is, and this one sounds more familial. Lastly, the class clown. This one might remind you of being back in the classroom a little bit. The slacker never had his books or anything to write with. He distracted the students around him with his poorly timed jokes and rude comments. Versus, the preoccupied student was forgetful, often missing his supplies. He entertained his classmates with humorous quips and clever wit. You can see the difference here. On the one side, perhaps this is, maybe this is a teacher's view of it, or maybe this is a negative teacher's view of this student. And over here is maybe how the student would describe himself, or maybe his parents would describe him. Okay, you get the idea. There are different reasons for using different words, even to describe similar situations. And it depends on perspective. It depends on how you want to sound to your audience. And it really depends on the sort of picture that you want them to have, especially in literary texts, but also the voice you want them to hear in the writing. So when we read literary texts, we want to hear if the author sounds negative. We want to hear if the author sounds enthusiastic. We want to hear if the author is being sarcastic, for instance. Okay. For instance, on this right side, this could indicate sarcasm if this is the actual situation. Right? So all of these different ways are, all these different examples give us a good view of connotation versus denotation. And how even when the same situation is described, it can be described in hundreds of different ways, depending on what we want to get across. And that's sort of when we talk about diction and we talk about that, the connotative and denotative meanings of words, that's what we're talking about when we look at literary examples, for instance. Hope this is helpful. Again, thank you for tuning in this week. Email your teacher if you have any questions, and we will see you next week.